Hi, my name is Mitch Tannenbaum, and I am the Chief Information Security Officer for Cybersecurity LLC based in Denver, Colorado. For those folks who are involved in the defense industry, most of you are probably aware of the move away from the pseudo-voluntary security standard called NIST SP 800-171 to the much more rigorous standard called the Cybersecurity Maturity Model Certification Program, or CMMC. I call it pseudo-voluntary or voluntary because nobody was watching over anybody's shoulder to make sure that they actually did what they said they were going to do. In the case of CMMC, there's actually a third-party certifier who is trained by the Department of Defense and who is approved by the Department of Defense, who has to come in and do the certification for you at the level that you are testing that you are ready to be certified at. So that's an important distinction. So let's go look at something here. I'm going to share my screen. And this is a Department of Defense Inspector General's report dated July of last year. And while CMMC was well underway by July of last year, they probably had this data for a year before that. So I'm guessing that there's probably a correlation here, even though they don't say that, between the efforts of the CMMC and what they're doing here. So what they were trying to do was determine whether or not DoD contractors were appropriately protecting controlled unclassified information maintained on their networks and systems. Pretty basic thing. They did conduct this in response to a request from the Pentagon to go do that. So what's important to notice here is that this is a really tiny subset of contractors. They picked 26 contractors out of 12,000 who had contracts worth $1 million or more. And of the 26 contractors selected, they assessed only 9 of them. So that's a small sample, but still, everything else being equal and that being fairly random, maybe that's adequate. And you'll look at the findings and you'll probably come to the conclusion that it is adequate. So, as I said before, this is all based on NIST 800-171, which is actually specified in the DFARS that you're supposed to apply with. They did this examination from March 2015 through June 2018, which is why I think the Pentagon had access to this data for quite a while. And they looked at reports of security incidents, likely breaches, and they found 126 contractors, on average, pretty much reported 2 breaches per contractor in that time period. So what were their findings? So first finding was that contractors did not consistently implement security controls which were required. First one was using multi-factor authentication. I think we can all relate to that. We probably have some systems that we implement multi-factor authentication, some that we don't. Using strong passwords, same thing. Probably they use strong passwords some places, probably not other places. Identifying vulnerabilities, the way you do that is by running periodic vulnerability scans, and periodic means daily, weekly, probably like that. Mitigating the vulnerabilities, and we see this a lot, where people identify the vulnerabilities, but they don't necessarily quickly mitigate them. We go look at the 1272 rule. The 1272 rule says, 2472 rule, that we should patch 0 days in 24 hours and all other vulnerabilities in 72 hours, because that's about what it takes for bad guys to go off and exploit one of these vulnerabilities. Next thing they found was that people did not consistently protect CUI that was stored on removable media. Next thing is the fact that they didn't do a good job of making sure that third-party security was as good as their own. Next one was that they didn't consistently configure user accounts to lock after extended periods of inactivity and unsuccessful login attempts. What that means is when you go away from your desk, does the screen automatically lock? And if you try to go off and log in, you give bad passwords, 3 times, 4 times, whatever, does the system lock the user out? Surprisingly, physical security was even a problem. And then one which doesn't surprise me very much at all is the review of activity reports of logins, failed logins, stuff like that. And lastly, granting system access based on users' role. So, that's kind of the summary of what they found. And that's not necessarily a great thing, because most of these controls are pretty basic controls and things that they ought to be doing. So that's kind of what that is. They determined as a result of that the contracting officers did not do what the contracting officers are supposed to do. So they're laying some of the blame on the DoD itself. The contracting officers did not verify that the contractors' systems met the standards before they awarded the contract. They did not notify the contractors of the specific CUI category related to the contract, and they did not determine whether the contractors' access, maintenance, or development of CUI met the contractual requirements. They didn't mark documents that contained CUI, and they didn't notify contractors when CUI was exchanged between the DoD agencies and the contractor. And they didn't verify that contractors had implemented the minimum security controls for protecting CUI. So that's, it looks to me like, the first part of this is they're saying, hey, the contractors aren't doing a very good job. And the second part of this is they're saying the DoD components are not doing a very good job. So, all that being what it is, they came up with a set of recommendations here. And, I think you'll see that some of these recommendations probably fall pretty close to what we're seeing inside of CMMC. So what they want to do, the first thing is they want to require that the DoD components, that would be the Army, Navy, Air Force, Marines, Coast Guard, people like that, define as part of the request for proposal and source selection that the contractors have the right security standards for protecting CUI in place. So and this has happened later, but what happened, right? If you go look at CMMC, it says that you will have the appropriate CMMC certification level prior to award. So that kind of handles that one. They want the DoD to develop and implement policy requiring the DoD contracting offices to maintain an accurate accounting of contractors that access, maintain, and develop CUI as part of the contractual obligation. So if we look at that, that's all inside of CMMC as well, right? So you're going to go off and develop standards in terms of controlling the CUI information. And finally, they want to change the current policy to include language that would require the contracting offices to validate contractor compliance with minimum security requirements. And that's really what the CMMC certification process is about. And they are in the process right now of making those changes to the DFARS. So, can I say that this was a thing that was, the straw that broke the camel's back in terms of causing people to, shy away from 800-171 and move to CMMC? I can't say that. But boy, does this look like a strong map onto what they're doing inside of CMMC? That it does. So I think this is probably a good indicator of why we are where we are. So with that, thanks for joining me today. If you have any questions, of course, reach out to us. We're always happy to answer questions. And in the meantime, stay safe.